Today we're working on solving quadratic equations by either graphing or factoring. So if we look here, we've got the graph f of x equals 2x squared minus 4x minus 6. And the graph is right here. So there's a few things that we can look at. First thing, we're going to write this equation in intercept or factored form. So when we're going to factor this, we're just going to look at the right side of the equation, and we first want to look, is there a greatest common factor? Is there a number that will evenly divide into both 2, 4, and 6? And there is. It's 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor out the greatest common factor, which is 2. And what we're basically doing is we're dividing all of these numbers by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is a 1, and 1x squared is just an x squared. If we take negative 4 and divide it by 2, that gives us negative 2x. And negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3. Okay, so now we want to look at what's inside the parentheses. Notice this is an x squared. There's not a number in front of the x squared. So this is an easy factoring. So we're just going to look for two things that add to negative 2 and multiply to negative 3. So the only thing that multiplies to 3 is 1 and 3, but we're trying to get them to add up to negative 2. So we put a negative with the 3 and a positive 1. So we're going to have x plus 1 and x minus 3. And then we have our 2 in the front. So if we're looking at this graph, the first thing we want it's asking is, what are the x-intercepts? The x-intercepts are whatever number cross the x-axis. This would be negative 1 and 3, which we found from setting each of these equal to 0 if you just had the equation. So we're going to put negative 1 and 3. Now, if we were to write these as ordered pairs, we would have the point negative 1 comma 0 and 3 comma 0. So if I ask you what the x-intercepts are, or the zeros or the roots, those are all the same thing. These are all going to be found at negative 1 and 3 if we are given that same equation right here. Now, how do the zeros and the factors relate? So if we have x plus 1, it's going to become a negative 1 because we want to set it equal to 0. And if I have a negative 3, it becomes a positive 3 because I'm also setting that equal to 0. So the number is the same, but the sign changes. Now, if I have this equation and it has y equals, and what does it mean by finding the zeros? The zeros are the same as x-intercepts. And if we're finding the x-intercepts, we're looking on this axis. And on that axis, the y is equal to 0. So when we're finding the zeros, we're going to set f of x equal to 0. Then we're going to factor and solve. Now, when we're looking at solutions, what are solutions of the equation 2x squared minus 4x minus 6? What we're doing is we're setting a 0 in here, but we want to take this factored form. So we're going to say 0 equals 2x plus 1 times x minus 3. And then we're going to set each piece equal to 0, x plus 1 equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. We subtract 1 from both sides, and x equals a negative 1. We add 3 to both sides, and x will equal 3. Okay, so now we have a different function. This one, we have 2x squared minus 7x minus 3 is shown. So what does it mean to solve the equation if we have this equation is equaling 6? So what we're doing is we're putting a 6 in for the y value, the f of x, or the y. When y is 6, I'm going to draw a line right at 6. Now let's just kind of zoom in here. There's a point here where it crosses and a point here. Now it's not exactly on the line. This one may or may not be right on the line, but this one is like somewhere in the middle. So it's kind of hard to tell just from the graph. But if we use algebra, then we can figure out exactly where it's crossing. So what does it mean to solve the equation? Explain and then represent the meaning on the graph. So we're going to just draw a line right here and right here. We're finding these points. We want to find the x values when y equals 6. So it should be something about -1, approximately -1, and approximately like 4.5. But we can't tell exactly where they are until we do some algebra. So let's look at this equation. Now the only way we can solve a quadratic equation is we want to set it equal to 0. Right now it's equal to 6. So the first thing we need to do is we need to take that 6 and get rid of it. So it's a positive 6, opposite of positive is a negative, so we're going to minus 6 from both sides of that equal sign. Now the only place where the like terms can be combined is just these numbers at the end by themselves. So we have 2x squared minus 7x minus 9 equals 0. Now, if you look, we have a number in the front, so it's not easy factoring. We have to do our lightning bolt here. So we're going to take the 2 and multiply it by -9 to give us -18. We're looking for two things that multiply to -18 and add to -7. This would be 1 and 18, or 2 and 9, or 3 and 6. All of those add or multiply to 18. Because this is a negative here, we have one of these numbers are going to be negative and one is going to be positive, but it could be either one. When we add them together, they need to add to a -7. So if I'm looking at 2 and 9, and I put a negative with the 9, +2 and -9 make a -7. So those are our numbers. We'll have 2x squared plus 2x minus 9x minus 9. Draw in your lightning bolt. And then we look at the first two. We want to look, what do they both have in common? Now they both have a 2 and they both have an x. So that is what we're going to be pulling out. We will pull out our 2x. And then we're dividing a 2x out of both of these. So the 2's cancel and one of these x's cancel. So there's still an x left. So this had a 2 and 2 x's. Now we have plus. Now we're dividing by 2x here. The 2's cancel and the x's cancel. So if you take 2x and divide it by 2x, we are going to get a 1 if you divide by the same number on both top and bottom. So we have x plus 1. Now whatever sign you have right here, that's what you're going to bring down. You look at the two terms. What do they have in common that we can divide out? They both have a 9. So we're going to divide both of these by 9 by bringing that 9 out. And we will have an x. Divide by a -9. The -9's cancel. I just have an x. Divide by -9. -9 divided by -9 is a +1. Now you know you did it right if you get the same number here in both of these cases. So now we rewrite our factors. So our first one is going to be 2x minus 9. And our second one is whatever is in these second parentheses, x plus 1. This all equals 0. Okay, so now we want to just set each of those pieces equal to 0. So we've got two pieces, we're going to set them equal to 0. We have 2x minus 9 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. We're going to just set each of those equal to 0 by add 9 to both sides. 2x equals 9, divide by 2, and we get x equals 4.5. And then on the other one, we minus 1 for both sides, so x equals -1. So if you look at what we actually guessed right what they were, but it could have been slightly off. So your guessing is not always going to be exact. So that's how you would solve it through algebra, but then you could just kind of estimate them off of a graph. Now this is one of the easiest zero product properties that we can use. So when we are saying zero product property, that means we are multiplying two pieces together to equal 0. If your answer is 0, then something has to be 0. So either this piece has to equal 0 or this piece has to equal 0. Because if your answer is 0, one of the pieces have to be 0. Like 3 times 0 is 0, or 4 times 0 equals 0. Something has to be 0 if it's multiplying. So we're going to just take each piece and set them equal to 0. So we have x plus 6 equals 0 and 3x minus 4 equals 0. We subtract 6 from both sides and we get x equals negative 6. We add 4 to both sides and then divide by 3, and so x equals 4/3. So our two answers are negative 6 and 4/3. Both of those will make it equal 0 if you plug them in. Okay, here we have an example that's all worked out. So if you're needing help on how to do these, you can look here and all the steps are there. Let's look at example 4. So if we look at our equation, our success criteria, these are kind of the steps we're going to be using. We always want to set it equal to 0 here. So the first thing is this is not equal to 0, it's equal to 2. So to get rid of that 2, we want to minus 2 from both sides. Now we want to set it so it's with the like terms. And so the negative 6 and the negative 2 are like terms. We've got 3x squared minus 10x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, so we have a number in the front, so we're going to use our lightning bolt. We're going to take 3 times negative 8, 3 times negative 8, which is negative 24. And we're looking for two things that multiply to negative 24 and add to negative 10. So we've got 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 8 and 3, 4 and 6. As I'm looking here, 4 and 6, they equal 10. Okay, so we want to kind of explore that and see if we can get a negative 10 out of these. Now, if I were to make this a negative 10, we would have to have both of these negative. But since a negative 4 times a negative 6 equal a positive 24, those don't equal a negative 24. So those ones cannot be the numbers. If I look at 2 and 12, if I make a negative 12 and a positive 2, those would add to negative 10. And when I multiply them, they will equal a negative 24. So those are going to be my numbers, negative 12 and positive 2. So we write 3x squared, bring that down. We have the negative 8 at the end, and we're splitting apart this negative 10 to be positive 2x and negative 12x. We add in our lightning bolt. We're looking at these first two numbers here. We've got they both have, the 3 and 2 don't have anything in common that you can divide out, but they both have an x. So we'll pull out just an x. We divide the x out, we have 3x plus 2. Whatever sign you have here, we're going to bring it down. So we have a negative. Now let's look at 12 and 8. We want the biggest number that will divide evenly into both 12 and 8. Now both of these are divisible by 2, but they're also divisible by 4. So 4 is a bigger number, so that is the number that we are going to pull out. And because this had a negative here, that is going to be a negative 4 that we're dividing out of these numbers. So negative 12 divided by negative 4, the negatives cancel. 12 divided by 4 is 3x, and negative 8 divided by negative 4 is a positive 2. Now you know you did it right if these two are the same here. Okay, so in our first equation, we're going to take our x minus 4 is our first parenthesis, And whatever is in these second parentheses is our second one, 3x plus 2. Now we have our equals 0 up here, and we're going to set each piece equal to 0. So we have x minus 4 equals 0. And our second one is 3x plus 2 equals 0. So we add 4 to both sides. X equals 4. We minus 2 to both sides. And divide by 3. So x equals negative 2/3. And both 4 and negative 2/3 will solve this equation. Number 5. We want to set this equal to 0. This has to be equal to 0. So we want this 2 to be brought over here. But since it's a positive 2, the only way we can get rid of it to make 0 is by minusing 2 from both sides of the equation. We're going to minus 2 here. Now notice there's not any numbers that are by themselves, so we're going to have to just kind of stick that in. It doesn't combine with any like terms. 3x squared minus x minus 2. Now, if you look at this front number, it has a 3, so we have to do our lightning bolt. So we're going to multiply our 3 and negative 2 to give us a negative 6. We want to look for two things that multiply to negative 6 and add to this number here. There's not a number, so it's a negative 1. We want our numbers to add to negative 1. We have 1 and 6, or 2 and 3 are the numbers that multiply to 6. Since this is negative 6, one of these numbers is going to be negative and one is positive. Now, if I have a negative 1 here, the only way to get that would be my 2 and the 3, because they're one number apart. We want them to add to a negative 1. So that 3 is going to be negative, the 2 is positive. We have 3x squared plus 2x minus 3x minus 2, and then we have our lightning bolt. We look at our first two numbers. They both have an x. We pull the x out, divide it out, and then we write what's left after we divide the x out. So one of these x's are gone, and so we'll just have 3x, and then we divide this x out, and we just have a 2. Whatever sign you have here, you're going to bring that down. And then 3x and 2, they don't have anything in common, but you have to bring something out. So you can always bring out a 1. So if they don't have anything in common, the biggest number that will divide evenly into both of them is a 1. So we're going to divide the negative 1 out. I divide a negative 1 here on each of these. The negatives cancel and it becomes a positive here. So we have a 3x plus 2. We know we did it right if these two second numbers are the same. So 3x plus 2, we have an x minus 1. So our first one is x minus 1. Our second one is 3x plus 2. And then we want to set that equal to 0. We had a 2 minus 2 here, which makes a 0. Now we're going to set each of these equal to 0. So we'll have x minus 1 equals 0 and 3x plus 2 equals 0. We add 1 to both sides of the equal sign. So x equals 1. We minus 2 from both sides. Divide by 3. And our second answer will be x equals negative 2/3. Okay, 6. We have some tricky things going on in number 6. Number 1, we need to get it set equal to 0. Now, when you're factoring, you have to kind of think about that you want whatever number is in front of the x squared, we want this to be a positive number. So since it's a negative here, we want to bring this to this side, okay? Now, if you had a negative x squared on this side, you would want to bring it to the other side so you could factor it, because we want that to be positive x squared so we can factor it. So I'm going to add 2x squared to both sides. Now there's nothing to add it to, so we're just kind of putting it at the beginning. We're going to add 2 to both sides here and here. So we have 2x squared plus 10x plus 8 equals 0. Now you want to look at these. You always want to look and see what's the if there's any number that will evenly divide into all 3 of the trinomial that we have here. So 2 will go into both 2, 10, and 8. So we're going to divide 2 out of each of these, and we're going to pull that 2 out front. So if we pull the 2 out, 2 divided by 2 gives us just 1, which is x. We just put x squared, plus 5x plus 4 equals 0. We want to see if we can factor inside this parenthesis here. Now there's not a number in the front, so this is easy factoring. We're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 5. So to multiply to 4, we have 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. Now 1 plus 4 equals the 5. So those are going to be our numbers. We have our 2. We put 2 parentheses. We want to multiply x and x together to get our x squared. And then we're going to have a plus 1 and a plus 4. And this is equal to 0. So now if we're going to set each of our pieces equal to 0. Now if you just have a number in the front, 2, if I set that equal to 0, 2 will never equal 0. So we don't really need to do anything with that one. We can have it if we set x plus 1 equals to 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. So we minus 1 from both sides of the equal sign. X equals -1, we minus 4 from both sides of the equal sign, and x equals -4. So our 2 answers are x equals -1, x equals -4. Now looking at 7, you want to look at your x squared. We want this x squared to be positive. It's already positive. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to bring this over here, because if we minus x squared, that will be a negative. So instead of taking this x squared to the left, we're going to take the 14x and the 49 and bring it to the right. So I'm going to minus 14x from both sides and add 49 to both sides. Okay, so we get 0 equals x squared minus 14x plus 49. Now this is an easy factoring because there's not a number in the front. So we're just looking for 2 things that multiply to 49 and add to 14. Now 49 is 7 times 7 is 49. Now 7 plus 7 is a positive 14, but we're trying to get a negative 14 here. So if I make both of these 7s negative, -7 times -7 is a positive 49, and -7 plus -7 is a -14. So those are our 2 numbers. We've got x and an x and a -7 and a -7. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set each piece equal to 0. So we have x minus 7 equals 0 and x minus 7 equals 0. Both of these equations are exactly the same. So if we add 7 to both sides, on both of these equations, we get x equals 7. So this equation here actually just has one answer, which is 7. So you would just put in 7 for your answer. Now on number 8, we want to set it equal to 0. We want to look at the 9x squared. It's positive, so we want to leave it on that side. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this stuff over here and bring it to the other side to be with that positive 9x squared. So we're going to add 3x to both sides and minus 30 from both sides. We have 9x squared plus 3x minus 30 equals 0. Now, when I'm looking at this, I am looking at 9, 3, and 30, and I can see a number that will evenly divide into all 3 of those. 3 will divide into 9 and 30 and 3 evenly. So we're going to pull that 3 out of the trinomial and just divide it out. 9 divided by 3 is 3x squared. 3 divided by 3 is a 1. So 1x is just an x. And if I divide 3 out of negative 30, I have a negative 10. Now I want to keep this 3, but I'm just going to kind of ignore it for a minute while I factor what's inside this parentheses here. So I'm looking at this. I have a number in the front. So if you have a number in the front, we have to use our lightning bolt. So we do our 3 and negative 10 is negative 30. We're looking for two things that multiply to negative 30 and add to a positive 1. If there's not a number there, it's a 1. So we want numbers kind of close together. You can go through and do all of the factor pairs, but this is going to be a 5 and a 6. To get a positive 1, we do a negative 5 and a positive 6. So we have 3x squared minus 5x plus 6x minus 10, and we put in our lightning bolt. Now looking at these first two, they don't have any number in common, but they both have an x. So we're going to pull the x out of the equation. So we've got we divide the x out, which gives us 3x minus 5. Whatever sign we have here, we bring down. Now, if I look at these second two, they do have a number that will evenly divide into both 6 and 10. They're both even, so 2 will go into both of those. So we're going to pull out a 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and we still have our x there, and 10 divided by 2 is a 5, so we have a minus 5. Now, if you know you did it right if those two are the same when you finish it. We've got our x plus 2 as our first one, and our second factor is 3x minus 5. And don't forget to bring that 3 down. Now, we have it set equal to 0, so we know one of these pieces has to equal 0. So we'll put the equal 0 at the end. Now, 3 will not equal to 0 ever, so that can't be part of the solution. But we can have x plus 2 equals 0 and 3x minus 5 equals 0. We minus 2 from both sides, so x could equal a negative 2. If we add 5 to both sides, 3x equals 5, divide by 3, and x equals 5 over 3. Now, number 10 is actually a pretty easy one, but it's one that trips people up. If you look at x squared and x, you always want to look, what do they have in common? They both have an x. So we're actually just going to pull the x out, and this gives us an x minus 3. Then you just go right to you set each piece equal to 0, x equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. We add 3 to both sides, and x equals 3. So don't try and make this one harder than it is. It's pretty easy, just 0 and 3, but that's how you're factoring it. You just pull out that greatest common factor. Okay, now looking at number 11, we want to first look at what do they have in common. And we have a 3x squared and a 12. We want the biggest number that will divide evenly into 3 and 12. Now 3 will go into both of these numbers. So I'm going to divide both of these by 3 and pull the 3 out front. That gives us x squared minus 4. Now if you look and you've got two square numbers, so x is squared and 4 is the same as 2 squared. What we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of both of these numbers. We've got our 3 we pull down, and then we put 2 parentheses. Now we take the square root of x squared, which is x and x, and those are going to go in the first 2 spots. We've got square root of 4, which is 2. And then 1 is going to be plus and 1 is going to be minus. This is the difference of squares. So if you ever see that pattern where you have a number squared minus another number squared, you're going to square root both of those numbers. On the first one, they go here, and the square root of the second ones go here. You have 1 plus 1 minus. Now let's set those equal to 0. 3 will never equal 0. So that's not going to be part of our answer. But we will take our x plus 2 equals 0 and our x minus 2 equals 0. And we minus 2 from both sides. We get x equals -2 and x equals +2. Here's one more of those where we have our difference of squares. 9 is a square, that's 3 squared, and x is a square, which is x squared. 25 is a square number because 5 squared is 25. So we take our two parentheses, we take the square root, square root of 9 is 3, square root of x squared is x, so we put 3x and 3x. Square root of 25 is 5, we put 5 and 5, and then you have 1 plus 1 minus, it doesn't matter what order, you can put plus minus or minus plus. This is equal to 0. So we're going to set each piece equal to 0, and then we solve for x. So we minus 5 from both sides, divide by 3. So x equals 5/3, and x equals -5/3 for our two answers there.